Hey, welcome to another episode of Cut of One. I am your host, Jay, just Jay, your resident troublemaker and your resident culture warrior. All right. You ever read an article and when you sort of get done with it, you're just like, "Oh, I think I'm stupider for having just read that." Um, yeah, that's sort of where I'm at with this one. So, all right, let's just go right into it. Um, What we have here, this is coming to us from the folks over at Game Rant. Again, Rings of Power. Why does Sauron take Galadriel back to her memory of Finrod? Of all the moments in her life when she was happy, he picked the one that started it all. Okay, this is by Alice Rose Dodds. We've seen her articles before. So, all right, let's see what she has to say. One of the most popular concepts in fantasy franchises is the idea of magical and enchanted objects that bring out the traits or characteristics already existing within a character and simply heighten them. This can be seen across things like the Super Soldier Serum in the MCU's follow up series, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and in the Mirror of Erised in the Harry Potter series. Sorry, I'm not a Harry Potter guy, so if I messed up that name, my apologies. In many ways, the One Ring from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings works in this way too, bringing out all of the greed and lust for power that already exists inside the hearts of elves, dwarves, and men. The ring manipulates its wearer into doing exactly what it wishes, and the recent Rings of Power series demonstrated that this is a skill the ring inherited from its master and creator Sauron. During the finale, Sauron manages to trap Galadriel inside her own memories so that she doesn't tell the others Halbrand's secret, which gives him time to make his grand escape. What is interesting, though, is that whilst he is psychologically manipulating her into joining him to rule Middle Earth, he picks some very specific memories to take her back to. He chooses moments in her life that make her question herself and her motives, and tempts her heart into bringing out the worst qualities inside her, the darkness and the rage that she feels. These are qualities that he can use to turn her into the tyrannical, cruel queen he wants to have at his side, who will help him obliterate the world and rebuild it in his own image of order and perfection. In choosing memories that bring out her worst motivations and desires, Sauron hopes to convince her that they are more alike than she believes, and that they could have the whole world at their feet if she simply lets go of the goodness and the moral resistance that is screaming inside her not to trust him, and gives in to temptation and desire. It is a terrible power that Sauron possesses, to be able to root through her psyche and select particular memories to rewrite and alter. In many ways, it is the worst form of mental torture, taking something so precious and so personal and warping it to the point I'm assuming where you can no longer remember what is real and what's not. It's the deepest violation and betrayal he could have committed against her at that moment, when she was already vulnerable from the realization that she had trusted him and he had duped her. Sauron could have picked any number of memories in her mind, any number of times when she was happy and safe, like her wedding day to her husband Celeborn, for example, or the first time she met Elrond as a child on the beach. Both of these memories are incredibly significant moments in her past, and ones that she carries with her in her heart always. So why did Sauron choose to take her back to the memory from the introduction, with her brother Finrod? There could have been several answers to the question, but they all have in some way to do with bringing out that evil and that darkness that has been growing inside her since the War of Wrath, the Tempest, if you will. The first reason is that this memory underpins everything she has been through in her hunt for Sauron in the last 1,000 years. This was a time when she was so young and naive, she never believed that a war would happen and that she would lose her brother. In the worst moments, when she is full of thoughts of revenge and anger and a will to dominate and obliterate, this is the memory that she comes back to in order to fuel that dangerous fire. The memory of her brother still alive, how he loved her, and how much she wishes she could go back to that. Finrod's dagger symbolizes this devastation inside her, this utter rewriting of the purity she once knew by a much crueler emotion, and that's why Sauron chooses this memory, in order to bring those awful feelings further to the surface and convince her that he has them too, and that they're not so different as she would like to think. In this memory, Sauron uses Finrod's words, quote, "Sometimes we cannot know the light until we have touched the darkness," unquote, to try to convert Galadriel, twisting her own brother's love against her and undoing everything she believes she knows about the world. The second reason is that it was actually Finrod who sparked her hatred of Sauron to begin with. So if he can convince Galadriel inside her own psyche that Finrod wants her to forgive the Dark Lord, then maybe she will actually do so, and then he would be able to channel all that rage and evil inside her towards Middle-earth, instead of it being aimed at him. He tries to gaslight her into believing that he actually wants to heal the world rather than destroy it, and that Finrod's sacrifice was a terrible tragedy because they actually want the same things. So therefore, Galadriel should help him to respect the memory of her brother by achieving Sauron's demands. Finrod's is the one death that goes against everything Tolkien believed because there is no heroic honor or justice for him. In fact, just the opposite. It sends his sister on a path of destruction and enmity that leaves her vulnerable to the exact manipulation that Sauron is capable of. Okay, like where to start with this? Oh my God. Okay. All right, so let's start. Well, first of all, she says that the ring inherits that the ring's power is it brings out things like a lust for power and greed that already exist in the hearts of elves, dwarves, and men. I think that's a really really loose interpretation. I could see why somebody would think that. Okay, you know what? For the sake of argument, I'll give you that one. Okay, let's just say you're right there. But she says that it gets its power, it inherited its power from its master and created Sauron. No, that is absolutely 100% wrong. It is explicitly stated that Sauron, when creating the ring, he imbued it with his malice, with his desire for dominance. Okay, he put some of that of himself. Remember, he's a Maiar. Okay, he's not locked into a physical, corporeal form. Okay, technically he's a spirit being, the same way like angels can be spirit beings but take on a physical form when needed. That's what Sauron is. So he put some of his essence. Okay, and for him it was this will to dominate, his willpower, his need to dominate. Okay, he put that into his ring. The ring didn't just inherit it. It's not like Sauron cast a spell and said, you know, abracadabra, and now the ring does this. No, it's literally his evil, his hatred, his need to dominate, his will to power is built into the ring from his very essence. Okay, and we talked about this in a previous video where Tolkien explicitly states that was one of the differences between Sauron and Morgoth, and why there's this whole thing of whether or not Sauron at the height of his power was quote unquote greater than Morgoth at his lowest. And one of the things that Christopher Tolkien pointed out was that whereas Morgoth put his evil into all the things he was trying to create, into his corrupted elves, which became the orcs, into creating, you know, the evil that was within the Balrogs and dragons, right? Glaurung. that Morgoth was in essence putting more of his own essence into these other evil beings to do his bidding, whereas Sauron was putting his essence just into one ring. Therefore, more he retained more of it. Right. So the idea that the ring just inherited its power from its master and creator Sauron is fundamentally flawed and shows a lack of understanding at the most basic level of what Tolkien was talking about. Okay. So now, let's see what else she also says. Let me bring it up so that you guys can sort of see what I'm looking at. What is interesting though is that while he's psychologically manipulating her into joining him to rule Middle Earth, he picks some very specific memories. Yeah. Okay. So she also sort of mentions that trust him and gives into temptation and desire. It is a terrible. Okay, well, again, the whole premise of this is sort of based on something that doesn't happen, that Tolkien didn't write. Sauron possessing this power to go into your memories and sort of flip through them and manipulate them. While I'm sure somebody of his stature, i.e., a Maiar, this sort of lower tier angelic being, probably could do something like that. I don't know, considering that Tolkien never wrote what the Rings of Power does with, Sauron trying to tempt Galadriel to the dark side. It's hard to say. I mean, like, literally, this is all just made up shit from the show. So it's really hard to talk about with any sort of understanding. What I do take exception to is she says Sauron could have picked any number of memories in her mind, any number of times when she was happy and safe, like her wedding day to her husband Celeborn, for example. Okay, yes. But also, what about, when her child was born, Celebrian? Because technically, when this show, Rings of Power, is taking place, Galadriel should have already had her daughter. Her daughter should already exist. So the fact that you don't even mention that, the fact that the show doesn't mention it, they keep saying how they went back to the books. They went back to the books. Okay, only insofar as, like you said, okay, they don't really mention anything, so let's just fill in the blanks. Because not only should Galadriel have memories of her husband Celeborn, she should also have memories of her child Celebrian. As well as meeting Elrond as a child on the beach. So you would think the birth of her daughter would be slightly more significant than when she first met Elrond, but I mean, hey, right? Who knows? Now the brother Finrod thing. The first reason is that this memory underpins everything that she has been through in her hunt for Sauron in the last 1,000 years. This was a time when she was so young and naive, she never believed that war would happen and that she would lose her brother. In the worst moments, when she's full of revenge and anger to dominate and obliterate, this is the memory she comes back to in order to fuel that dangerous fire. The memory of her brother still alive, how he loved her, and how much she wishes she could go back to that. Finrod's dagger symbolizes this devastation inside her, this utter rewriting of the purity she once knew by a much crueler emotion. And that's why Sauron chose this memory. Sauron uses Finrod's words about touching the darkness to convert Galadriel, twisting her own brother's love against her and undoing everything she believes she knows about the world. Here's the problem with this, though. According to Tolkien, okay, Finrod right now is in one of two places. He is either at this point in the halls of Mandos, okay, awaiting sort of his judgment and then being sent back to Valinor, or he's already in Valinor with the love of his life. I believe her name was Amirie. I believe. Yeah, Emirie was the woman he loved, and when they sort of left Valinor, Emirie stayed behind. But if you read Tolkien, if you read the books, you know that Finrod is actually sent back, and he ends up spending the rest of his days in Valinor with her. Okay, so he actually has a happy ending, to some extent, I guess. Within Tolkien's world, I guess you could say it was a happy ending. But Galadriel would know this. Galadriel would have been aware of this. She would have known this. So, like, you sort of undercut the whole idea of her needing to hunt Sauron to begin with, of her needing revenge to begin with. It doesn't make any sense, because she should know that her brother is either in the halls of Mandos awaiting judgment, or he's already back in Valinor, in which case, she should have stayed on the boat within the show. She should have stayed on the boat and gone to see him. Okay? So the whole thing just doesn't make any. The whole thing screams of somebody who hasn't read the books, who doesn't really understand what was going on. Finrod's is the one death that goes against everything Tolkien believed, because there is no heroic honor or justice for him in the show. And that's the problem. In the show, they go against everything Tolkien believed. Okay? Finrod's death does not send his sister on a path of destruction and enmity that leaves her vulnerable to the exact manipulation that Sauron is capable of. This is all nonsense if you read the book. Now, I know some people are going to make the argument, well, they didn't have the rights for those books. I understand that. However, saying I don't have the rights to the complete legendarium is not a pass for making up your own shit that contradicts the legendarium. Okay? That's where Tolkien fans are sort of, drawing the line in the sand. Yes, we understand you only had limited access to the Lord of the Rings books, the Hobbit, and the appendices, okay? But that does not give you carte blanche to just create stuff up that is counter to the stuff that Tolkien actually wrote. And this particular article points out how none of this should even exist, okay? Because Tolkien, he explains what happens to Finrod. You know how Finrod's story ends, okay? We know that Galadriel is not like this, okay? And she wouldn't be like this because she would know where Finrod how he's ended up, okay? So she would not have ever considered being on this path of revenge and vengeance and being an insufferable bitch. Her even like the little things here, like the memories would not only have just been of her husband and Elrond, but I don't know. I'm thinking when a woman gives birth to her daughter, it's a pretty important moment, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, ladies. I'm assuming that's something that would register high on that list of important memories. It's not even touched on. Why? Because I guarantee you, nobody knows about Celebrienne, because they don't have the rights to any of those books, and so on and so forth. And clearly the person who wrote this article, is a fan of the show, but not so much of Tolkien's books. I can't, confirm that Alice Rose Dodds, whether or not she has read the books, but the fact that she's putting out articles like this, it says that she's a Lord of the Rings enthusiast who grew up with Tolkien's tales. I got to question that. I honestly got to question that, because you would not be writing articles like this that literally in the face of Tolkien's work make no fucking sense if you are a fan of his work. I'm sorry. A fan of the show, you may be. Clearly you are. A fan of Peter Jackson's movies, you may be. I don't know. I can't say that you're not a fan of Tolkien's books, but I could definitely say I have my doubts as to if you've read anything more than maybe The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Okay, that I would question. Again, I could be wrong. I'm not trying to attack anybody's character, but when I see an article like this where it poses a question that is the question itself is so fundamentally flawed because it has to discard and work against things that Tolkien wrote, I have to wonder about your credentials. And again, I'm not propping myself up. I am no Tolkien scholar. Okay, I have not taken college courses on Tolkien's work. Okay, I'm just a guy who really likes high fantasy, who goes into like deep dives when it comes to Tolkien stuff and the world building that he did and the legendarium and the lore. I do the same thing with the Elder Scrolls stuff. I love their world building and lore. Dragonlance is another series of books that I love the world building and lore. That's just my thing. I like that stuff. So I'm not claiming that I'm some sort of Tolkien scholar, but I am claiming that I seem to be clearly in a position where I could write articles for Game Rant if they were to ask me. So let's start a campaign to get J from Cutter One to write Game Rant articles regarding Tolkien and Tolkien lore, because I can promise you they would be of a better quality. Anyway, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Do you think that the whole premise of this is goofy? And flies in the face of what Tolkien wrote? Galadriel would have known that Finrod is either in the halls of Mandos being judged, or he is already back in Valinor with the love of his life. Therefore, there would be no need for revenge. Therefore, she would not be walking around like an insufferable bitch. Therefore, Sauron would not have been able to try and tempt her. Therefore, the ring would not have inherited its power from Sauron, because, apparently a ring can just do that. You make the ring, it inherits your power and personality, according to this article. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. If you just kind of shake your head like I do when you see these articles, and you're just like, what the? Anyway, if you like the video, then like the video. If you feel like sharing the video, by all means, please feel free to do so. I'm working on my English here. If you have not subscribed, I would hope that you would consider it, trying to get this thing up to 500 before Christmas. And if you have subscribed and are returning, thank you so much. I appreciate all your support. Yeah, so I'm just going to leave it at that, because I have really nothing more to add. Yeah, game rant. If you want somebody who's at least willing to take the time out and do their research before putting out an article, hit me up. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Be good. Bye.